Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Members Lecture. We're glad we made it. We're glad we got here from July of 2020 to July of 2021 to October of 2021. So thank you so much. We're always very happy to see you all here. Obviously very happy to be together again. Very proud of what the museums do, and they do depend on people. And so we're very grateful for your presence here. And with many of you who are our members, very grateful for your support as well. I have a couple of introductory announcements. First of all, you may have already heard, we're doing our annual Capturing a Masterpiece photography contest, and it's open to members and visitors. There are many great prizes at stake, including a special Arthur treat. And submissions for these photographs are accepted through October 31, and you can just ask Kate Morgan for any details on that, and there's also information on our website. We also want you to know that we share our members' artistic talents in our annual museum member showcase, and we have our 5th annual showcase on view starting November 5th and running through December 31st. And as always, Kate will give you any details on that and any other exciting happenings. We are going to host a members' festive holiday weekend in early December. All of the Christmas decorations will be up in Fenimore, and so we think that it's going to be a great, I think, festive holiday celebration that Kate is putting together, and we'll have details on that in the coming weeks. And then I also want to remind you that Marc Brown is doing a live Zoom Storytime event tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m., broadcasting from the auditorium in the Fenimore. And he's also doing an in-person book signing in the Arthur Gallery up on the 2nd floor afterwards, and there are registration details available on our website. And then lastly, after this lecture and a short Q&A, we're going to repair to Fenimore, across the road, for some light refreshments, and then about 5:30, our 2 illustrious visiting artists will be available to you in their respective galleries on the 2nd floor. So today, I should have introduced myself. I'm Paul D'Ambrosio. I'm the president and CEO. I never think to do that. It's a small town, of course you know who I am. So today, Marc and Laurie Brown are going to do something they've never done before. They're going to share the stage with a focus on each of their own art-making efforts. They've spoken about their collaboration on children's books, but never as artists in their own right. And when I asked them how I should do the introduction, Laurie said to me, "There's no precedent for this, so you're on your own. I'm sure you'll come up with something." Both of us are eager to hear what you have to say. Well, I first met Marc and Laurie Brown when I visited their home in New York, ostensibly to see their collection of American folk art. This is how I get into great houses, great homes. But it was at the suggestion of my board chair, Jeff Pressman, who's also a folk art collector. But it was one of the few visits where the folk art, which was lovely, actually gave way to my astonishment at what else lay in store for me there. The Browns are such down-to-earth people, and they were on that from that very first visit. So unassuming about their many accomplishments. Marc, of course, is the creator of Arthur, and Laurie is an important self-taught artist in her own right. When my teenage daughter, who grew up on Arthur, approached Marc for the first time and told him what an honor it was to meet him, he just smiled at her and laughingly said, "Oh, you need to get out more." What is most interesting about Marc and Laurie Brown is that despite how different their artwork is from each other, they're clearly a team. They not only support each other's creativity, but they are a sounding board for each other. In many ways, they have the same mission to make the world a better place through their art making. When I first stepped into Laurie Brown's studio, it was like entering another world. One whole wall of the studio was a kaleidoscope of color, with reds yielding to corals, yielding to light pinks and then white, and the white yielding to a light blue and a darker blue and then a very dark blue, and so on. And it wasn't because she had painted the wall. It was because she had arranged a wall of books according to the color of the spine, which is not a bad organizing principle, I have to say. The rest of the studio was a world of paper sculpture, painted, sewn, pierced, folded into shapes that at times resembled antique game boards like the kind they collected, and at other times simply the humble objects of daily life. Her passion for the intimacy and warmth of paper was astounding. Laurie has had a very successful career as an artist. She was born and raised in New York City, attended the High School of Music and Art as a music major. She was further educated at Cornell, Columbia, and Harvard, where she received her EDD. Laurie has had nearly 20 solo exhibitions in the United States and abroad, including the highly respected American Primitive Gallery in New York City. She has had prestigious artistic residencies in Greece, Italy, and France. Prior to her artistic career, Laurie authored 17 popular picture books for children and illustrated one of them. Most of these, including the recent Democracy for Dinosaurs, a guide for young citizens, were illustrated by Marc Brown. In her artist statement for her Fenimore exhibition, Laurie states that her art shows that small acts and gestures can exert power greater than their size would warrant. This idea, it occurred to me, is also true of her husband's work. And what can I say about Marc Brown that you don't already know? He was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, and he was inspired by the storytelling of his grandmother, Thora. He always had a penchant for drawing and painting, and he attended the Cleveland Institute of Art, where he actually faced opposition from his colleagues for wanting to be an illustrator. Although he was able to get a deal from the publisher Houghton Mifflin, he also began teaching at the college level while pursuing his dream. However, in 1975, he found himself unemployed when the college where he was a professor went out of business. And it was shortly after becoming unemployed that Marc made up a bedtime story about an aardvark who was worried about his nose. This simple story developed into one of the most beloved characters in the history of children's literature and television. And I do want to point out that 2021 is the 25th anniversary of Arthur's appearance on PBS. It's also Arthur's 45th anniversary appearing in books. Not many of you know, not many people remember, Arthur's last name is Reed. Marc's mission all along was to get kids excited about reading. Was he successful? Well, Marc has sold more than 65 million books. So yeah, I think I was responsible for at least 20 of them. Marc's also a 3-time Emmy Award winner. Marc's exhibition at Fenimore is Believe in Yourself, What We Learned from Arthur, and Laurie's is titled Toying with the World, Works by Laurene Krasny Brown. Both are on view through December 31. I'm delighted to have the Browns here with us today to give their lecture entitled A Partnership in Picturing. And at this time, I would ask you to join me in welcoming our first speaker to the podium, Laurene Krasny Brown.
That was great. Thank you. It's very exciting to see you all and be here. Thank you so much again for coming. And thank you, Fenimore, for inviting us. Since I'm the first speaker, I thought I should say something about romance and art, because it is so unusual for a husband and wife to be having their own exhibits at the same museum at the same time. So I'm going to tell you about an incident when Marc and I were just dating. And I invited him over to my apartment in Cambridge, Mass. For dinner, I think. And we were in the kitchen, and he was standing next to me, and I must have opened the refrigerator. And this is more recent, in the refrigerator, and he said to me, whoa, something like, whoa, Lori, that looks like a still life in there. And he had also said to me something like, you know, you are really an artist disguised as a psychologist. And I'm thinking, I like the way this guy thinks. So indeed, almost every day, I consider the inside of the refrigerator a still life. And that's why I'm showing you. There's current. This is the pantry. A little detail. I'm showing you this also because the way most of my work happens is because there's something really close at home that I care about, that I cherish, bless you, that I want to honor in my work. So to make the transition to, let's say, fine art, this is a detail from an installation I made when I was a visiting artist at the American Academy in Rome. So the bookshelves that you get in your studio, most people use them for their art supplies and so on, but I emptied it and I lined it with paper, my most important material, and I started to make the genesis of a pantry. Similarly, this is a block print of drinking cups, something I hold every day, and to me, I look for beauty in those things. This is a table setting in paper, except for the cherry tomatoes that have to be regularly replaced. And I did this a few summers ago when this was pretty much my go-to lunch. I had grown cucumbers for the first time. I was very excited about that. And the blue cheese is from a local farm. And the grape leaf was because I started growing grapes on the fence of the garden. This is, I guess you could say, a still life, a bowl of berries. It's collage. And this is, it's called Hommage à l'Orange, so homage to the orange. When I was an artist in residence at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, I decided that my theme would be the orange, partly because almost every morning we squeeze a couple of oranges for juice, partly because I think they're lovely. They're really an important part of my life. So everything I made revolved around that. And when we had open studios at the end of the month, I made mimosas for everyone. So the whole studio smelled like orange. And I think this is the last example from this little group. This is the top of our cupboard on Martha's Vineyard, only in paper. And the yellowware on the shelves is what's there. So things close to home is definitely a theme in my work. Another theme is American folk art, which is one reason I feel so happy to be at Fenimore, where there is such a formidable collection of American folk art. I feel a little more at home because of that, I'm sure. And it's partly, the inspiration I get from American folk art is partly because Marc and I live with that furniture and basketry and quilts and game boards. But it's also because of the palette and the patina of old things wearing down and wearing off color, which I try to bring to my work. It's the craftsmanship. It's the love of a material. And maybe most of all, it's the valuing of an economy of means to take something simple and try to do as much with it as you can. So when I first started doing this work, I was making paper quilt tops like this one. So this is, it's really assemblage where each piece is separate and you put it together like a puzzle. So they're dyed pieces of paper, dyed in gouache and then painted and fitted, so to speak. This is the log cabin pattern. This is the same series. This is my version of a crazy quilt, and the plaid ribbons are, the plaids are really vintage ribbon that I was looking at. This was the first, these things were in the first solo show I had, which was with Stephen Score, who's also a dealer in folk art. This is a game board to me, more of an invented game board. It's called Game Tracks because of the way, in my mind, there's a little metal ball that's zigzagging down to some sort of trap at the bottom. Likewise, this is also an invented game board in my mind. In this case, the rings are rubber. They're the washers in your hose. And the plugs are wood. And there's a story about getting those pieces of wood prepared, which I can tell you later if you're interested. This is more familiar. This is Parcheesi. I gilded the paper and then I painted over it. And you'll see some Parcheesi boards in the exhibit across the street. I mean, you could spend how many years investigating that composition? It's so iconic. Similarly, the checkerboard. And when people made them mostly out of wood, I mean, they didn't even sign them, and there's such beauty there. So there's also a small cluster of checkerboards in the show that we're having here. This is an example of a woven piece, except paper, and the tray is kind of the loom. This is from that series 2 called Looming. And this is an example of a still life, and I'm also thinking about theorems. And of course, that has a long history in art. Another theme in my work is geometry. So the square and the three-dimensional cube and the circle and the sphere and the triangle and the pyramid. So here are plenty of squares, and the centers are wire mesh, like window screening. I mean, they come in all those gauges and they're already full of squares. For me, it's like irresistible. Again, this is from a series of game panels full of squares. This was part of the first time I did a show, the only other time I did a show called Toying with the World, like this show, with Arne Anton at American Primitive Gallery. This is also, I guess it also is a game board. To me, these are little cages because they're in relief and they're made both from that metal mesh and paper. And here's one example of the work becoming a cube with, of course, all those triangles, thorny triangles. That's in our show here. Here's a work featuring circles. To me, these are like reels of film, and they're about to spin. That's how I see it. And here's an example using circles that have become holes. And it's a way to show you that I'm always adjusting the color of what I do. It's always changing just a little bit so that we look at the nuances of things. Here is our hemispheres. To me, this is a plate of confections, I think because of the colors. And there's a larger piece in the show across the street using that same form. Here's a use of triangles. So a square piece of paper folded diagonally, can do amazing things, in my mind, just by shifting the hue and the value. This is from a series called Sail, like S-A-I-L. Another example of riffing off of triangles. And here's a three-dimensional version of triangles. This is from, I made a whole lot of these pyramidal things a few summers ago. They're all settlements. Because remember, a few summers ago, it seemed like in the newspaper every day, the front page photograph was a boat load of migrants desperate to cross the Mediterranean without drowning. I mean, and so I was making them settlements, because you would also see the next week, maybe, you would see a photograph of a refugee camp that had been improvised with acres and acres of the same form of shelter. Another theme in my work is architecture and housing. This is more, I guess I think of it as a folly. It doesn't have a function. The top comes up and it's like an escape hatch, and I usually put a ladder in there so you can get in and out. And in my mind, these are all models, all these things I'm going to show you, but in my mind, they also could be very big. They haven't done that yet. In this cube, I dipped the squares of metal into a bath of paper pulp. It was like an overbeaten abaca pulp, and so it gets very thin. And so when you lift them out and they dry, so the abaca shrinks and the water evaporates and the air bubbles break, and you see the little circles. I mean, in a billion years, I would never have been able to plan this. I would never have known this was going to happen. It's one of those cases of serendipity working out in your favor, I thought. This is a monument. It's true. I have a few of them. This is from a series, a few of which are in the show here, which Marc has cleverly called affordable housing. He's very good at this marketing business. He says that, well, Laurie, you'd pay a lot less for that than you would a mortgage. Another one. Here's one with landscaping. This is housing with a lot of air passages. It's very breezy. It's from a show I did on the Lower East Side in Manhattan, where they were all facades on the wall, like one of those planes, but then in some cases I made a three-dimensional shape out of them. And last but not least, a pair of mobile homes. I think it's because I love the way the Airstream trailer looks so much. To bring it back home, more recently, this summer, spring-summer, I started making a series like this one. These are looking inside a home, almost like inside a dollhouse, I suppose. And it does sort of close up, too. So when you think about toying with the world and games and play, you think about games, I do, but they're rule-governed. And there's another side to play, which is pretend play, imaginative play, which is the opposite, really. You can make the rules and break the rules. It's totally up to you, and I think that's just as important. So in this case, it's about everyday life or domestic life, but it has some narrative, mysterious, who knows what's happening in there quality. This is the thinking room. And that's what it looks like, more closed up. And another example is the night room. In each of these interiors, there's some kind of relationship between person and bird. So keep your eye out for that when you go across the road. Just to finish, oh, here's another view looking inside. I don't know what's going on with them. I'm showing you this last but not least, because it's in my studio. It's the debris from the stars that you might have just noticed in the room before. I gilded that paper, and like many times, the debris is so lovely to me that I really don't want to throw it away. And moreover, sometimes one of those teeny tiny pieces shows me what I want to make next. I can't even understand that, but it's true. And very last, this is the studio. You're looking at the studio I have on Martha's Vineyard. I'm very fortunate. But we're looking through from the house, which has the window screen in it. That's why it looks a little fuzzy like that. So I'm going to stop there so that my lovely husband can come up and continue. But I want to thank you so much for your attention. And please, please, if you have questions, please save them till we're done and we will answer them. Thank you.
Oh, that was so much fun. I get the more relaxed version at home. I want to echo what Lori said about thanking everyone here at the museum. Working with you on making this happen, or my show upstairs, was so much fun. It was like working with family, and you just made it really great. So thank you for that. And it's just an honor to be here. You know, I can remember when I started, illustrators on books were not even mentioned on the cover or the spine of the book. So to be here in this wonderful museum and having my art celebrated is really a treat. So I was thinking about what I was going to talk to you people about today. And, you know, the thing that came to mind was the beginning, and I kind of think the end of where I am with Arthur, but the very beginning of my work as an illustrator was illustrating a book by Isaac Asimov called What Makes the Sun Shine. And I had a very patient editor who believed that there was something here that she could work with. And she gave me this manuscript, and you know, I struggled through, and it was okay. I don't want to look at it again. But I was so curious about meeting Isaac Asimov, and because he was just such a brilliant writer and so prolific. And I got my courage up, and I asked him, you know, what he thought about the art. And he said, well, I looked at it, and he said, but then I reverted to a 6-year-old, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do today. I'm going to ask you to revert to 6-year-olds, and a lot of this is what I talk to kids about, and kids have the best questions. I love that. And so what I did mostly was form this little talk around the most often asked questions that I get from kids. One that isn't included was from a 2nd grader in Dallas, Texas. He raised his hand and he looked so eager. I called on him. Yes, what's your question? Mr. Brown, if you're so famous, how come you're not dead? Next question. Okay, let's see. Oh, there's Arthur. I just put this in because I love Whoopi and she loves Arthur, and anyway, there she is. Okay, what was I like as a kid? Oh, I was a little kid planning my escape from Erie, and I knew a lot of important people. And apparently I was packing some heat back there in kindergarten. Oh, okay, I'm getting a little aggressive with this button. What was my... Oh, well, we're talking about jobs that I had before I started doing this. This was a television station in Erie, Pennsylvania, WICU. I was working there briefly as an art director, and my first assignment was make more people watch the weather report with Shirley Ramsey, the lovely woman in green. My idea was to dress her up as a weather fairy. And she would fly into the set at the beginning of the weather report, and she would be on a swing, safe, and then she would jump off and she would be in front of a wishing well, and she would tiptoe over and say, "Well, what's happening today with our weather?" And I would be in the well. You wouldn't be able to see me. And I would say things like, "It's snowing today, Shirley. You better get out your earmuffs." Well, shortly thereafter, there was a little pink slip in my mailbox. But now I tell kids, you are my boss. I have the best job in the world. I love going to work every day. And I really miss talking to kids at schools. I haven't been able to do that with COVID. What gave me the idea to write these books? Well, when I was in high school, I had a baby sister, and all she did was cry and poop. And I got the idea of reading to her, and that calmed her down. And this was the book that she loved most often, Where the Wild Things Are. And it planted some kind of a seed in me. I was mesmerized by Sendak's ability to tell a story with so few words and pictures. And I realize now from working on, I guess, maybe 150 books, that it's a delicate balance of the words and the pictures. And what you want to do to make a picture book successful is take away those words that the pictures are doing and add words that the pictures can't do for you. So that's always on my mind. I did love to read, but we didn't have a lot of money, so there weren't a lot of books at our house. But I had a great-grandmother and a grandmother who told us stories whenever we wanted them. And my great-grandmother's stories were about coming from Ireland and getting stuck in an iceberg and cutting the bread down in the hold of the ship during a storm for her 13 brothers and sisters. And then she would show me the scar on her hand where the knife went through the bread and it cut her hand open. And her stories were filled with great details like that. And Grandma Thora would tell us spooky stories and take out her false teeth. And my dad was not interested in reading books to us, but he did a wonderful favor for me. He would take me to the Erie Public Library on some Saturdays. We'd go upstairs, we'd go right by the children's room, and upstairs to where antique architecture books were. He loved old houses. And, it's a real lesson about what we share with children. When we're really passionate about something, it can leave an indelible image, an impression on that child. I have now restored 8 antique buildings. So I work on Martha's Vineyard, where I have a bigger studio in New York City. I work in a garden shed I call the tomb. It's about that big. But here I work upstairs, and I've got a good amount of space, and I built a table that I stand up and work at, which for me is the best way to work. And kids want to know, do I have hobbies? And I think my favorite hobby is growing things. Both Lori and I have gardens, and I grow raspberries. I have a big raspberry patch. And then I love to bake pies. That's a raspberry blueberry pie with orange zest. So the ideas for me come from real life. I think the best stuff happens there. And, I think that's one of the reasons the Arthur television show has connected with kids. The characters are real. You'll find out about that soon. But also, all those stories happen from families and kids where these things are really happening in their lives. That was my son, Tolan. And he was worried about going to day camp, and that's where the idea for Arthur's Camp came from. Tucker was worried about a tooth that wouldn't come out in second grade, and the book Arthur's Tooth happened from that. Eliza had real trouble dealing with training wheels. She wanted them off that bicycle, but it didn't work out so well at first. And then DW had the same experience with her training wheels. And upstairs in the gallery, one of the things I wanted kids to see was how a book happens. You know, for me, the story is the hard part. Once I get the story written, then I do kind of a game plan, like a storyboard, very similar to what we do with television. I didn't realize that the two media would be so similar. And you know, there are a few things that I've learned about writing stories. Ernest Hemingway said it best. He had such a way with words, didn't he? And, you know, another important thing that I learned about picture books is that every picture book has a message. The Cat in the Hat. Let strangers into your house, but don't tell your parents. Or how about the little engine that could? If you fail, it's all your fault. The Polar Express. If a strange man invites you on a train, follow him, but don't tell your parents. My favorite, upward mobility is possible as long as you're hot. Disney has learned a lot about that, hasn't he? So yeah, for me it was writing about what I know, and it all began in third grade in Miss Kingston's class at Lakewood Elementary School. There's Miss Kingston up in the corner, and this is me, the nerdy kid in the second row. And my best friend, Terry Johnson, turned into Buster in the television series of books. I kind of like this girl, Patricia Del Porto, and she turned into Sue Ellen. David turned into the Brain. This big kid over on the side here turned into Dickie Barnes. Doesn't he look like a teacher? How many years was he in third grade anyway? That's Prunella up on the top in the flowered dress. And our wonderful teacher, Miss Kingston, she would make popcorn for us in class. And she got married that year and invited the entire class to her wedding. What the heck was she thinking? I have a friend here. We both experienced Mr. Rathbun in algebra class. And you know, he left an indelible impression and became Arthur's teacher. Is he your favorite? Yeah. I love hearing that. Yeah, I know. He is a really fun character to write about. And other characters in my life turned into people in the books. My sister Bonnie became Francine. She was really good at sports, liked to talk a lot, very bossy. And I kind of combined all three of them to make DW, Triple Trouble. And I have to admit, I'm a lot like Arthur. I am working on a new book right now. My buddy R.L. Stine, who writes the Goosebumps books, we worked on this story together for kids, two little monsters called Honey and Funny. And this is actually in progress. It's on my desk at home now. So eventually, Funny will get eyeballs. And there's another, you kind of see it. It's all cut paper. What's the coolest thing you ever did that I can tell kids about? I think it was working with Barbara Bush on her literacy initiative and traveling around and getting to know her and her husband. And I mean, I loved it one night before we were supposed to go out and do a talk. And Barbara was kind of micromanaging everything going on. And George Sr. said, "Barbara, sit down and shut up." This was a day she said, Mark, if you come over to the White House, I'll take you upstairs where the president lives and give you a tour. And at that time, Laura and George W. were living there. And it was just an amazing day. Got to see George's socks on the floor in his bedroom. And then Laura asked me if I'd like to go to Moscow with her and represent America at the first Russian Children's Book Festival. And that's R.L. Stine over on the right there. That's the time we met. And this is actually Air Force One. It's kind of set up like the caste system. Up in front there is the pilot, and right behind that is a little apartment for the president or whomever is in there. And they have their own bathroom with a shower and then a little living room, a bedroom. I know because I went in and peeked. Okay, this was right before we talked to kids, and Laura Bush read Arthur Meets the President, and that's Mrs. Putin. That's when President Putin was married at the time. And I don't know why she's wearing that tragic yellow and blue suit. But that night, it was really an amazing thing to remember. We had dinner in the Kremlin, and every librarian in Russia was invited. And of course, Putin arrives late, the doors open, and the horns blare. And it was so much fun to be there with Bob Stein. At one point, he said to me, Mark, what's that music the band is playing? It sounds so familiar. I said, that's Hang On Sloopy. This was my favorite part of being in Russia, leaving. We're at the airport and saying goodbye to the American ambassador. And look, if you see that up in the left-hand corner, that's the Secret Service agent that just spotted me taking pictures. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to take pictures. He actually tackled me, and I was down on the tarmac, and he was trying to take my camera away. I said, well, what if I erase the pictures? He said, you're going to erase them? I said, yeah, I'm going to erase them right now. He didn't realize on the back of my report card, Miss Kingston in 3rd grade wrote, does not follow directions. I've got the pictures. Okay, why did I make Arthur into a TV show? A lot of it had to do with my friend Fred Rogers, who knew how to use television in such powerful ways to be helpful to kids and families. He was actually one of our first guest stars on Arthur. Well, what happened? Fred got cut out of there. And then he said, Mark, can I come to your studio and film one of my episodes? And it was about demystifying animation for kids. And so we had Michael Yarmish, who was the very first voice of Arthur. Well, I think we've had 12 Arthurs now because the boys' voices start to change. And then Fred, I'll never forget this. I had so many wonderful conversations with him, and I think this kind of was why I named this last Arthur book, Believe in Yourself. We were, before they were setting up the studio with, the cameras and lights and everything, and Fred came over and he said, Mark, I just wanted to ask you about your grandma Thora. And I started to tear up because in my childhood, she was like the most important person to me, someone who thought that my little drawings and stuff that I was doing were important, and she saved them in her bottom dresser drawer. And she would put a couple dollars a week in the bank for me to get to college. And Fred said, oh, she sounds a lot like my grandpa McFeely. And he said, Mark, every child needs just one person in their life to believe in them, to make it. And, I think for a lot of kids, teachers are that one person in their life. And, teachers are my heroes. I get to visit a lot of elementary schools, and I see what happens in their classrooms, and I see how they help kids so much. So I say, let's hear it for those teachers. And anyway, this is the last book. And when I finished writing it, I went back to the first book, Arthur's Nose, and the book ends with, and there's a lot more to Arthur than his nose. And I thought, little did I know how true that would be. Thank you for being such good listeners.
I think we'll have the Browns take a few questions. If there are questions, would you like to come back up, both of you? Yeah.
Don't ask us how old we are or how much we weigh.
Where on Marc do we live? We live in off Lambert's Cove Road in Tisbury, really. Almost the edge of Vineyard Haven into West Tisbury.
Do you go to the Gray Barn? Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Any other? Yes.
My father is much very slow. At times when I was and my father, even now, it's like he wasn't as a little kid. We got to show like the works I know, like we got to W faster the cast members that are kids. And this was just great writers, great singers. Like when you stay with it, that's basic.
So Melissa has 22 and she has two siblings that are.
She gave me a great drawing. Which I have right here. Thank you. Any other questions before we send you to detention?
Yes.
We have a story about the one that had the hose washer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to use that ring was sitting on my work table, and I knew I had to fill it. And I knew it was, I think, 5/8 of an inch, and I knew I needed it to be maybe, I forget, 1/3 of an inch or 1/2 an inch. And that wasn't just available in the craft store, Dowell's. I couldn't find it. It was on the Vineyard. So I went up to E.C. Cottle. Which is a lumber supply store. And I'm standing in line with all these big carpenter guys, you know. I'm waiting my turn to go up, speak the woman in the office behind this glass panel. And I get up there and I say, I'm doing this art project. And right away, I'm dismissed, basically. And I need some cylinders cut to these dimensions, you know. Like, and she said, well, you know, she's like, I don't really know if I can help you, but you could go over to the wood shop. You could talk to Michael. So I went over to what looked like the wood shop, and there's this one guy in there, short, stocky guy, and he comes over finally, and I explain I'm doing an art project, and I need about 150, because I still have some I haven't used. And he's very skeptical. He said, just call, I forget the name of that craft store that used to be on Main Street in Edgartown. Just go over there. They'll have what you want. And I did try, and they didn't have what I wanted. And in the meantime, though, the amazing thing is he actually called me. I don't know what got into him. And he said, well, I could cut them for you, but you know they'll be all ragged. You'll have to sand them, you know. I said, it's not a problem. That would be fantastic. So I go, and sure enough, I get this fabulous bundle, which I bring home and sand and paint. And I said, listen, when I finish my project, I'll come and I'll show you. You know, I thought that would do it, right? And I finished it. I brought it over to him, and I wish I could have a better punchline. I showed it to him, and he was like, you know, like in his mind, he's thinking, I was right the first time, you know.
Security.
What is this?
That's one of my favorite pieces. I love that piece.
There's someone over there.
I absolutely love your stars in the ball. The stars in the ball.
Oh,
Because I love when I drop a beat and then find it, go crazy over that one beat. But I wanted to ask you, so, you're spontaneous with a lot of what you're making. When you do something like that, it's like you just find it and you get inspired. Did you have any interest in like Japanese, like the origami ever? Like, was that ever interesting?
well, it's beautiful. But, you know, it's not really what I do with paper. That's a whole culture, I think. I mean, that would be another lifetime. There is so much to do, isn't there? Yeah. No, really, it's not. Yeah. I appreciate it, though, for sure.
Yeah.
That's
Lynn.
your friend.
When I was in college studying education, I took the kitty lit course. And, you know, I've always read as a kid, but as an adult looking at children's literature, it was all new to me. Maurice Sendak was the first one that just, oh my, wow. Did you actually meet him? And
Lori, you met him. Lori did. I didn't get to meet him, but Lori did. We've had mutual friends, but tell him about
you
your
know,
day.
he doesn't like children much. Isn't that amazing? Well, I met him just very briefly, because I was, when I was working on my doctorate, we were looking at storytelling and children's learning. And Mort Schindel, who had this company called Weston Woods, which did, at the time, film strips of children's books, that's so ancient. We were having a meeting at Weston Woods, and he knew Maurice because Maurice Sendak's books were one of the ones that he made into film strips. So I forget what we were meeting about, but I was very taken by the fact that Maurice was there. He was a real hero to me. The work is so special. And I was watching him, you know. He didn't participate. I don't know why he even agreed to come, but he was sitting there doodling. He was doing his own thing totally. And I think he just channeled his child to do his work. He channeled the child he knew in himself. That's my sense.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I've met a lot of people who write and illustrate children's books, and they really don't like kids. And it always puzzled me. But it is that they are so in touch with who they were back then. It's easy for them to go there and
Yeah.
work out things. Well, thank you. For more questions? Okay.
I came a little late, so apologies if you already addressed this. In regards to the Arthur theme song for the TV show, it's so encapsulates the entire course of the series. Do you have a say in the lyrics for that song?
How did the lyrics happen? It was a collaborative effort. We worked with some professional songwriters, and then my executive producer, Carol Greenwald, and I, and other people who work on the show, we all kind of toyed with it and played with it and moved things around, added things. And it was a real joint effort, but I wish I got some of the royalties for that.
But didn't you want that musician? Weren't you?
Yeah, Ziggy Marley was my first choice. And I was invited to go down to Jamaica when they recorded the theme song. All right, Paul, help me.
We're waiting for Arthur Goes to Jamaica. What a treat. What a treat. Thank you both, Marc and Lori Brown, everyone. Thank you. And now, please join us at Fenimore for some light refreshments and some gallery time with Marc and Lori Brown. We'll see you across the street. Thank you again for coming.